Welcome, folks. We're going to do an introduction in a few moments. But until we get started, we would love for folks to grab a sheet of paper and think about your role in hiring, staff and leadership transitions, and maybe write down a prompt related to each. Write down a few words related to each prompt. So a challenge related to hiring and staff transitions is, an opportunity related to hiring or staff transitions is. So when I think of a challenge related to hiring, it could be, it should have happened 6 months ago. We needed staff right away, right? Like that could be a potential challenge. An opportunity could be, this is our first time hiring somebody, or this is our fourth hire, and we're expanding a new program, and this person's going to be critical to that. So that could be an example as an opportunity. Sometimes the opportunities and challenges are closely linked. In the next 2 weeks, I want to achieve, and that could be related to you holding yourself accountable to something that you learn here, or that you talk about with a colleague here. And then a question I have related to this topic is, and this is us trying to make sure that you get all your questions answered in this training. And that's important. We want to make sure that we talk about the questions that you have. All right. We are going to wait, and I'm going to leave it up to you.
Yeah, let's give it maybe a few more minutes and we can start. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. This is part of Long Island Sound Community Impact series of trainings as organizations apply for this grant and hire for their projects. So we have Leah, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your last, Weiner, from the Nonprofit Learning Lab, here to do a training on hiring and retention. A lot of you guys had questions around that. So this will be great to kind of go over that.
Yeah, we're going to get started in one moment. I'm just going to wait a few more moments. You can start working on those prompts, and we're going to share them also in the chat so that you have access to them. Give me 1 second. I wanted to tweak one thing. All righty. Okay. So if you're just logging in or still getting prepared, grab a sheet of paper, fold it in half twice, and just answer the prompts that you see on your screen. I would also love for folks to introduce themselves in the chat. There's going to be ample times for people to share their name and organization. But if you'd also be willing to share your name, organization, and how many people you have on staff, or if that's a boring question to you, when are you hiring? If you're hiring in the next, 3 months, then maybe, or you're having a leadership transition in the next 3 months, feel free to share that in the chat. That gives us a sense of where folks are in terms of this conversation. So welcome, and thank you all for joining us. Is it okay for me to get started?
Yeah, I think you can get started, Leah. We have about 12 people in the room, so.
All right, Maggie's with the Alliance for the Mystic River Watershed, and they're doing their, I guess, first hire. All right, I love it. I love it. And Susan just shared that they have 12 folks on staff. So welcome. Really, this training is about hiring, onboarding, orientation, transitions, and leadership transitions. So when we think about hiring, right, that's almost the first step of bringing staff in. And then when we are getting folks acclimated, employees acclimated to our organization, that is orientation, training, and onboarding, which we're going to talk about, and then keeping folks on staff, which almost connects to your hiring. Like when we think about retention, we want to think about it when we hire, because some of the benefits and the policies that we have connect to retention, and that often occurs sometimes when we are doing our hiring process. So it's not something that we want to only be thinking about after we have employees. It's something that we want to think about right from the start, right when we do the hiring. And then leadership transitions. So how do you prepare for transitions, whether it's a founder, whether it's the executive director, or it's a program director, right? So Diana just shared that they have seasonal staff and they're hiring program managers. And I venture to say that there is a bit of a transition when the seasonal staff leaves as well. So we always are sort of experiencing transitions with staff, and that's something that we want to be thinking about. So what we're going to cover is we're going to understand best practices for a leadership pipeline. So really, what does it mean to hire? What does your transition process look like for retaining staff information? So shared documents and exit memos. What does it also look like to train and orient and onboard your staff so that they're prepared for their role? All right. So those are some things to be thinking about. I was briefly introduced, so we'll run through this quickly. This training was developed based on research and best practices. So sharing our own experiences. We'll send you the slides so you have access to everything. And then my background is I have a doctorate in organizational leadership and development. So how we learn together. So you're going to get access to the recordings and slides and handout. If there's a handout connected to the slides, we'll talk about it and we'll say, this is a handout, check it out. And then if you have questions, ask. So whenever you have a question, you can ask in the chat or you can unmute. And I notice immediately if somebody unmutes, but you can also raise your hand. So whatever is most comfortable to you is what you can do. And that's how we ask questions in this training. Should you need tech support, we have it available. And then as we go through this training, we're going to be having some full group conversations. And we ask that you unmute and be on camera for those full group conversations because it makes it that much more engaging. We'll do one small group breakout room, depending on what we see. All right. And then one other thing to be thinking about is as we go through this training, we're going to share lots of ideas. And I want us to be reflecting on like, what is your role in the organization? What is your capacity to do some of these ideas? And how might they align? Because we can't do everything. And so we have to give ourselves a little bit of space and grace to realize that and think about what might make sense to implement this month, next month, and in 3 months, so that you're not getting overwhelmed with all of these potential ideas. And some of these might make sense for you right now and some might not. So in Maggie's case, they haven't hired anybody yet, but they are going to. And so perhaps some of these hiring best practices are more relevant to Maggie versus someone else who's not doing a hire in 6 months. So just sort of giving you examples. So some hiring best practices. So one of the things that I think is often thought about is you need staff right now, right? So if you are understaffed, and anybody can share any opportunities or challenges that they have related to hiring. If you need staff right now, you're thinking about what you need for right now. But one thing that we could think about too is where do you want to be in 6 months? Where do you want to be in a year? Where do you want to be in 2 years? Because the people that you hire are going to help get you there. And so that's something that we want to think about when we are doing hiring. All right, like think of that almost as your goal. Where would you want to be in 2 years or 3 years? And is this person that you're hiring, if it's your first hire, second hire, third hire, are they in alignment with where you want to be? We always have limited resources. So how do we hire for knowing that we have limited resources? Knowing that maybe the wage that we are paying isn't as much as maybe another organization, if that's a constraint that you have. All right, we'll give some ideas. And then what does it mean in your organization to write a job description? And how detailed are you in a job description? I like to think of a job description almost as a marketing tool, right? As a way to share the opportunity that's available to the individual. And then also being really transparent about what the job is, right? Because somebody has to read the job description and see them doing the thing, like see themselves in that role. And then what does it mean to get your first hire versus your 10th hire, right? As an organization. And that might be in the approach. I would love for anyone to share in the chat or unmute, what's a current challenge or opportunity in hiring? Anybody willing to share? Unmute. Christina, yes. Would you be willing to share your organization too?
Yeah, and I just switched chat, so I posted it under my other one, but I'm from Groundwork Bridgeport in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Okay.
So in terms of, well, I'll start with the opportunity, which is we've been actually waiting several months now for a grant contract that will allow us to hire a data storyteller. And the nice thing about the grant, once we get it, is it's 5 years. So we'll have this person for a good while. So I'm excited about that. Haven't yet written the job description. In one sense, I feel like I should, because I want to be prepared, but at the same time, I'm waiting for the grant so I can build the time to that grant. A challenge just generally for me, like in the nonprofit world, which is I've come to realize after running this organization for 8 years, is the pressure to hire immediately, and sometimes not the best fit for the role, I would say, because you have a 1-year grant. So if we get a grant that's a year or 2 years and it involves, part of it is about hiring someone, it can take 3 to 6 months really to go through the process. And then you only have 6 months left in the grant that you're supposed to execute on whatever that's supposed to do, person's supposed to do. And that's not a lot of time to get someone onboarded, used to the organization. If you say that's like a 3-month process, first 90 days, it's this weird pressure to hire in the nonprofit world, trapped by the limitation on the grant.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
How do you prepare to hire knowing, and then Monique, feel free to go. How do you prepare to hire knowing that you're sort of in this crunch, right? Because you want to hire by the time of the grant and you have a limit. Like, what's been one of your strategies to do that?
I can't say I really had much of a strategy other than similar to this data storyteller role that we will be hiring for. Again, this one is a 5-year grant. So I know that, we don't have to rush in that first year. We can take a normal process and still have 4 years with that person, 3.5 years. But again, it goes to, we're a relatively small nonprofit, like our budget, our fiscal 2022 thing was like $495,000 for the year. And so we don't have a lot of unrestricted funding. And so again, with that, I, normally would want to be preparing this data storyteller job description and thinking through it, but that does take time. And if I don't have a grant to bill that to, we're like lawyers, we need to have billable hours and billing it to someone. It means that I delay until we get the grant contract. So again, we were awarded a grant in September, we found out. It is now May. We still don't have the contract. And so, you know, like it's that weird kind of nonprofit like game that you have to play all the time. Or at least I feel that that's what I
Yeah,
have to
one
play.
thing that and this goes to, okay, so when we think about leadership transitions, like major leadership transitions, and this is to your point a little bit, is thinking about, and then Monique will have you unmute, and if you can be on camera, that's amazing, is what positions are absolutely critical in your organization that you could not run your organization without them? And could you always have job descriptions ready to go for those positions? And so it's almost like thinking in advance and getting them ready potentially. I like, you know, not that you have time for it, but like, might that work is a strategy, right? Because we're also going to be talking about leadership transitions and how we prepare for those. Just and we're
Well,
going to share a job description template in a moment.
I will just say one last thing and then give space for everybody else in particular. But I will say one thing I usually do is when I have found I have a running sheet that's like tasks that I need to be done, and I define like, okay, I need someone at one day to like do X, Y, and Z. Like I use alumni engagement coordinator. Like I've been writing down that stuff, you know, for years now, type of thing. So
Oh, good.
that's one thing that I do. But that I will pipe down.
No, this is good. This is helpful for other people. So Monique, I'd love to have you share, if you could unmute and be on camera, or if you want to go in the chat.
I can unmute and I'll come on camera. Hi. So my thing with hiring is a lot of what Christina said, definitely plus plus. And I just saw in the chat what Diana shared as far as like, I'm just thinking of when we are looking at targeting communities that are historically oppressed or oppressed at this current moment. This might be our first time hiring anyone. This might be a very new organization, not even having any experience in hiring folks, not knowing like all of the legal things that need to be met as far as like, equal opportunity, OSHA, whatever might be the case, insurance and all of those things. So it's also difficult to even start to think about this process for a new organization or for a grant that might only be 2 years, right? And then also the idea that if you are, looking to hire within a community, you don't want to hire someone with a temporary job, so that is also a big factor. Even if it's 5 years, that's still temporary, and folks, you want to have some more guarantees for folks. And yeah, that's the issue with grants. They run out, and then what are you supposed to do after that?
So yes, 100%. Yep. Like these are real, Monique is sharing real challenges, right? Like if we want to hire somebody within a specific community, we want to make sure that they have a permanent position. And so can I ask a follow-up question to you? What does it look like? So if you have a grant for 5 years, what might it look like to seek funding in the second year of their position for, like, what would it look like to try to make the position more permanent?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's twofold, because what we see right now, and okay, let me back up. My name is Monique Fitzgerald. I am been a part of this cohort because I'm a council member at the Settlecot Nation, which is a First Nation here on Long Island. And so we're not an organization like a traditional organization. We're a nation and we have a 501c3 to do work, right? So a lot of the work that we're trying to do right now deals with environment and climate. However, and there is a lot of funding for that right now.
Mhm.
But who's to say that that funding sticks around? And so, how do we know that we'll have funding for whatever project that we're working on to be continued? So that's one of the challenges in finding funding. Like you could probably get some funding right now because it's available, but I find funding sources to be fickle. There's it moves with the moment. So that's one of the issues. And then again, we're a nation, not an organization. So we don't have experience in hiring at all. So, and even grants, we're not really, we haven't really delved into that. So being able to get one grant is an accomplishment. That would be a first feat, right? And then to get another grant, like we're already putting the cart before the horse. So we have to accomplish getting one grant first, and then see what the bandwidth is to get another grant.
And you
And
got the grant, correct? Like that's why you're here. No.
no, we had to pull out. That's the other thing, right?
Okay. Got it.
So yeah, I think also the point is that yeah, we're still a nation that we're not a nonprofit. We don't just go after grants, but we do want to do work, and a lot of this will entail possibly hiring people. So we
Mhm.
would have to expand and grow, I guess, a nonprofit sector. But
Mhm.
we're not paid individuals, so we do this on our volunteer time.
Yeah, so
So
you're all volunteer and you don't have any paid staff.
no paid staff.
Yeah. So that's going from all volunteer to paid is a big shift, right? Because it's a significant shift in terms of the structure of the organization and the responsibility and the seeking for funding. Because right now all of your funding, I'm guessing, goes towards programs and not salaries, right? So there's more questions obviously than answers. Always. Always. So some things to think about. We're going to talk a little bit about how to set a wage with a limited budget, unless everybody's in the situation with unlimited budgets. And if you are, then this is not relevant to you. All right. But I'm guessing that we are resource constrained. And so one of the things, and Maggie, if you have a question, feel free to ask. One of the things that I wanted us to think about is what does it look like to hire and expand when there are budget constraints. So if you're doing that first hire or that eighth hire and you want to be cognizant of the wage for the employee and the benefits, what are some things that we can be thinking about? So like these are some strategies, right? And so we want to be thinking about maybe the position is part-time as opposed to full-time, right? Like if you can only pay 60,000 or 55,000 or 70,000 or whatever it is, right? Like, or 45,000, maybe that position is part-time as opposed to 40 hours a week, so that the person has the opportunity to like make what they need to, and they aren't working 40 hours a week. So that's what some organizations do because they know full well that they can't pay the 80 or the 75 or whatever it is that the person needs. And you all live on the East Coast where wages are very different in general anyway, so something also to be thinking about. And then flexibility. So how flexible is the work environment, right? Obviously, if there's some of you all are all volunteer, I imagine there's the opportunity to work from home, to hybrid. And so what does that look like? Other things to be thinking about is we're going to talk about a job description in a moment, but being very transparent in pay. So literally listing the hourly rate. If it's an hourly position, listing it on the job description. And then also if it's a salary, listing that. I know there were some questions about how to hire and like what the wage should be. And there's a link in this slide to compensation wages for certain positions across the country. Now, if the cost of living is higher, be skewed a little bit and you're gonna have to pay higher. So that's something to be thinking about. Another, and Marco, if you have a question, go for it. If that Q was a question, I can't tell. Was that a question? Maybe not. Marco, did you have a question? No. Okay. And then one other thing to also think about when we're hiring is when you pay for when you're paying an employee, you're also paying payroll taxes. And those are typically about 22 to 25% of a salary. And if you don't have unlimited funds, sometimes it can be more attractive to a person to actually pay benefits. So to pay directly, right, for their cell phone, for their health insurance, and to give PTO, which may cost less than an extra $3,000 in salary. Because an extra $3,000 in salary is not just $3,000, it's 25% plus. So that's something to be thinking about. And when you're a smaller organization, you know, there might be opportunities to look for directly paying healthcare through a provider, right? And so, and it just depends per state, but that's something to think about is collaborating, like having conversations with your board about what it might look like to directly pay for healthcare benefits as opposed for the employee paying for it, right? And that could be like a healthcare plan can be anywhere from, depending on where you live, right, $250 a month to $300 a month for an individual with direct pay. So that's something to think about. I don't know if it's always an option. And Diana asked the question, like maybe the benefits that you look at are like covering the cell phone bill, covering the internet in somebody's home, maybe also, you know, the flex work environment, PTO, right? Like there's other, if your organization is thinking that healthcare benefits are too expensive, right? Like in the current stage. But sometimes the great, yep, go for it, Christina.
I just wanted to, instead of typing, comment to Diana about the health benefits being unaffordable in terms of other options. So we actually use, not an HSA, it's a HRA, a health reimbursement account. So staff, like I buy my own insurance, and any staff we're using, like not married or whatever, buy insurance from the state health exchange, and then we reimburse up to the amount that whatever the board votes on. So if it's $100 that you can afford monthly per employee, you can do that. It gives you the flexibility to choose, and the feds set the limit in terms of the max you can reimburse for the year. And I think it's like $5,200 this year, or I forget, it's been changing over the years. But it gives you the flexibility of choosing how much you want to reimburse the person. So that could be an option.
Yeah. Thanks, Christina, for sharing. Anybody else have a share or a thought? So I want to get to, oh, Christina, you also talked a little bit about hiring and not, and maybe the skills weren't there. Do you want to speak to that?
So the biggest issue I've had with staff where there's been issues is an inability to deal with adversity. I'll sum it up that way. Or when I used to work in finance and I worked for a tech startup, so I'm relatively new to the nonprofit world, coachability and staff is important, but if someone's not willing to hear, issues or anything else, that becomes a big problem in the type of environment that we're in. We're a small environment. Every person matters and having, we're not a large environment that can, have issues with even one employee when you're 3 employees type of thing. But I've struggled with trying to assess that in an interview, right? It's easy for someone to write down oh, I have Microsoft Excel skills and something like that. And, they can't budge too much on that, but the softer skills, I don't know. I've struggled with assessing that. I've tried to think about looking into those tools where people can take tests, but one that I found is $7,000. You have to subscribe to a whole year subscription. You can do it for a month and thing. But again, and I don't know how many other nonprofits are on here that are small, but you almost don't have the ability to make mistakes, especially if you're like me, where they say hire slow, fire fast is one of the sayings, and in the book Good to Great that talks about getting the right people on the bus, and there's a whole nonprofit section about it. Well, it kind of sucks if you bring someone on and then you realize, they're not the right fit. And I maybe overthink it, oh my God, they have, kids, they're going to be sending someone to college. I can't let them go now. That's horrible. Which is probably something I need to get over, but I just want a better way of figuring it out before a person gets in as best as you can.
Yeah, so things to think about, and in the chat was shared probationary periods are helpful. So some organizations have 6 month, 3 months, 9 month, 1 year probationary periods with the idea that, this is, we're trying this out, right? And we're going to make sure this is the right fit. Other things to also, right, think about and reflect on are, what do you ask in the hiring process? So what do you ask in the hiring process to find out people's ability to engage in those soft skills? If I what questions might you ask? And maybe how would you handle XYZ? How would you engage in this conversation? If this were to occur in our organization, what would be your approach to it? Sometimes those scenario-based questions can help you get a sense of somebody's soft skills. And I like to ask them in 3 different ways, because somebody can have a great answer to one question, but if you're asking the same question 3 different ways, you'll see potentially, right? It's not a sure thing, but you might see somebody's skill in handling those situations if you're asking the same question in, 3 potential different ways. Anybody else have, the soft skills is hard because sometimes you don't see it until the moment. And so we want to almost talk about the soft skills as much in the hiring process as anything else. Because it doesn't matter if the person knows Microsoft or Google Suite or, all that stuff, if they're not in alignment with your organization's values, that is that's not gonna work, right? And so we want to ask about those questions in the hiring process just as much as anything else. And I think that asking them in different ways can get you information the information that you might need. So that also means thinking about a script when you hire and having set questions potentially. Let's demonstration. Do you want to share out loud?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think it depends on the position. Like this isn't applicable for a lot of other roles, but I know for most educational roles, you're usually asked to like submit a draft lesson plan or do a demo. I don't know if it's like a restoration project, if they can do like a demo workshop, and that might be like one way to kind of gauge skill set. But I agree, kind of having those questions during the interview of scenario based really helps, and then really setting those probationary rules and from the beginning and being transparent, I think is helpful. Like, you know, you have 60 days or you have 30 days and, we'll kind of reassess. I think that might be helpful too, but great question.
And one thing that I also want to share is don't don't ask someone to do a project on their own time. And I say this because it's like it's just not good practice. So and I know that folks want to get a sense of what people can do, but the scenario planning, and if you really want to know if somebody knows how to do Salesforce or whatever it is, you can have folks share in the, like, if your interview is remote, right? Like we're all remote in Zoom, you could have somebody share their screen and show you their ability to do Salesforce, or you could have somebody share their screen and show you their ability to write a letter versus create blah, 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 blah for us. And then the person has to spend 3 hours of their own time doing it. And we want to move away from that. Like and so I think you get a better sense of somebody's skill, them showing you in the moment right then and there, because that's often what work is, right? Doing things in the moment, handling, working with volunteers, working with community partners, and people don't necessarily get 8 hours to prepare. Like it's happening in the moment, and we want to see like how they would handle the situation. So
I just want to echo that. So I actually once had to write a whole strategic plan for like a nonprofit, and I did it, and then I was super pissed about it because I'm like, I think they probably just used this after the
yes,
fact.
they did.
And I was hired. I ended up not taking the job because the whole process was frustrating. However, related to what you said, I think it might actually be useful. One, if you do have someone do something, pay them for that time. And then, but two, is I like what you said about having them show you in front, because these days with AI, that's another thing I run into. Like people can generate stuff and that's not what they're going to produce once they started.
Yeah, so really during the interview process, really making sure that people demonstrate to you what they can do. And I'm sure that they use your strategic plan. So don't give away work for free is our lesson, right? So thanks, Christina, for sharing. So go for it, Diana.
So I want to get back to this point is related to what Christina has been talking about, and that is finding sources of suitable candidates. And that's a real challenge. I mean, I've tried Indeed and it's been a painful process. They send me 1,000 responses. And even though I ask people locally, I get responses for people in Canada, for instance, right?
Mhm.
And it's expensive. And I spend more time going through people I don't want than the things I want. And it's really a challenge for the not-for-profit world because, we're competing against people who are for-profit companies who can pay zillions of dollars, right? And so I want to find out if anybody has found any pipeline of candidates or where we can go to to find candidates that are suitable, and we get responses.
I'll chime in with two recommendations, which I've yet to use, but only because I've just been so busy. But one is, I went to the university I went to for undergrad as a program for seniors who are just graduating to do like a fellowship for a year at a nonprofit. And I know you might think, oh, they're just graduating, but honestly, the interns I had, and I have them every summer, not this is fellowship, have been amazing. So you can reach out to them to get on their list for when they have that program. The second thing is, the only issue I have with that program is that you have to do it on their schedule. And so I actually was thinking of creating our own fellowship program that is like a year or two long, aligning with grants, because people will take jobs for less money when it's a fellowship and it's a resume builder. That's how Teach for America was able to get people, because there was cachet in the fact of like, oh, we're doing this fellowship for good for a year for this organization, and then they would go on and work in finance. So I think that's a solution. I just haven't had time to yet do it because I'm still waiting on all of these grants, but that's something I would recommend.
Another thing to think about, and I just posted this in the chat, is who cares about your organization? Right? Like, who are your community partners and who's engaged with the work that you're doing? And how can you share the posting with them? Because on Idealist, right, you're sharing this information, like they might not even know who you are, but if you share it with if you write down all your community partners and all the people that engage with what you're doing, and think about, like, I would love to source a candidate with somebody who knows what we do, then you're more likely to get potentially a candidate that better aligns versus, right, as I think Diana shared, somebody in Canada who's never heard about you. So, and thank you for Christina for sharing that fellowship program. I also listed a few other places where you can share. And then also think about, are there certain degree programs within a university and sharing the position with those? So that's how our organization has hired all of our staff members, is through local universities and just sharing it with professors and saying, is there anybody in your degree program that's looking for a job? Or local community colleges, or posting in a university job board versus Indeed, because it's so large and you're going to get so many and you don't have the time to go through 1,000 resumes, but you might have time to go through 5 resumes of people who are local and, live 3 miles away. Yeah, you're always hiring, right? Like, you're always recruiting. Like, I think, is Monique, for your organization that is volunteer run, are you always looking for volunteers in that sense?
Yeah, we are always looking for volunteers.
Yeah, so I have a background in working with volunteers, and you're always recruiting volunteers, but we aren't always hiring. But maybe we do have to sort of get into that mindset of, as Christina shared, that you're always hiring, but like, we know that when we work with volunteers, we're always trying to fill a volunteer slot. Like, it's constant. And sometimes we have to think about that on the flip side with hiring, so that we can find the right candidate when everything lines up perfectly with funding and in the grant cycle. So one thing I want to make sure that you all have is a job description. Yeah, as Maggie shared, start with the networks, your community partners. So literally write down a list of all of your community partners, and you probably have it anyways, and email out the position description to them. And you don't need to get 15 resumes. You can get 3 or 4. They'll probably be better because they know your organization and they've interfaced with your organization than 1,000 who don't know who you are. Like, you don't need that many to find one. And if they're better quality resumes because of their connection to your mission and alignment with values, that might be better potentially. So nothing's ever a perfect answer. I'll say that. So I want to make sure you all have a job description template, and this is also a resource. So we go into more depth with the job description template as a downloadable PDF, and we're going to share the resources with you. And so this just is sort of a helpful tool for you to be thinking about, what do I write in a job description and what's required? And I think that for most of you, salary is required. And I will say, I think because some of you are based in New York, and I will say, don't be the organization that doesn't post the salary. Like, post the salary. It's really important. And don't even post a range. Post the actual salary. So if you're paying $30 an hour, say I'm paying $30 an hour. Or if there's a salary, say what it is, so that it's really transparent. Other things to be thinking about are an interview rubric. So using a set of questions and maybe even create a script. So this makes sure that every single time you are interviewing a candidate, you're asking everybody the same questions. Because we don't want to ask some people some questions and not the same questions to everybody else. That skews your process. And then I would say you want to hire the right person. So you want to think about, where do I want to be 2 years from today? And that might mean you need to do 2 to 3 interviews. Like, maybe one of your interviews is focused on the hard skills and one interview is just focused on the soft skills, so that you're paying enough attention to their values and how they would interface with your mission and how they would fit into your organization's culture, how they might respond to a certain situation. Other things to think about are, sometimes there will be organizations that want experience over a degree. And this is some of the language that people use for posting in this type of position, like degree not required, looking for candidates with life or work experience for this position, or, we encourage women and BIPOC people to apply. I want to take it a step further, because sometimes you might be hiring for a position and a certain language is required to actually perform the duties of the position. So this is how you write it down. So Spanish speaking is required to perform duties of the position. Or I got the example that there needs to be a connection to certain communities. So this is what you might write, like deep understanding and connection to X-tribal community. Like, you could actually write this out, because this is, right, like whatever you need for your organization is, so like Maggie just shared, like you can include LGBTQ plus, right, to apply. Like, what are the needs for your organization? What do you want to seek out? And directly write that down. Because if they're going to engage with certain communities, or you want to make sure that you're getting candidates, you have to make sure that you're incorporating that into the job description. So yes, 100%, Maggie, yes. And then other things to also be thinking about is, if you're hiring for, like, one example, right? If you're hiring for an LGBT organization, you might want to write out like 5 years of work experience with X population. And that might get to the soft skills, because if somebody doesn't have experience working with the population, they might not have the soft skills to do that in the moment. So that's another thing to think about. So these are just some ideas. So we've already talked about this a little bit, and we were having these conversations as a large group. But is there any other questions that folks might have related to how you might prepare for the process, how you might implement some of these strategies? Any thoughts? Maggie?
Hey, this is our first time, so most of our questions are pretty basic. But in our case, we don't have an office, so we would be asking this person to work from home, and we don't know what the appropriate questions to ask, because I know that some in an interview there's some questions about home that are and should be private and would be inappropriate to ask about. So how do you frame those kinds of questions to ensure that the person has a place that's uninterrupted to work in, etc.?
Yeah, so one thing to think about is asking the questions of, have you ever worked from home, right? And what was that experience like for you? And can I ask you what the position that you're hiring for, what's the pay scale? Would you be willing to share that with me?
Yeah,
what are you
sure.
paying
We
for-
actually have two part-time positions. One is from the LISCIF grant,
Mhm.
and that's 750 hours at $55 an hour for grants management.
Okay,
And then we have another one that we received from the Community Foundation of Eastern Connecticut. That's $50,000 for 1,000 hours of part-time executive director work.
okay.
And that's over 50,000 for 2 years.
So it's basically a 50%. So the math is like that. It's basically a 50% position and they're making $25,000 a year. Or $55,000 a year.
No, so it's the ED part-time ED one
Mm-hmm.
is 50,000 a year.
Got it.
For what I think it actually came to something like $35 an hour for 30 hours a week or something like that. And then the LISCIF one is 750 hours
Got it.
for $41,000 plus, but it's only 1 year.
Okay. So some things to
So
be thinking
someone
about.
could do, if somebody had the skills, I mean, that's a pretty wide skill set, because one is more focused on communication, volunteer management, community engagement. The other one is more focused on grant management. They both have to do with fundraising, but there's not necessarily a lot of overlap, and
Yeah.
we would want the ED person to be in a leadership pipeline. The other one, maybe we could hire as a consultant. Don't really know, how we're going to do that. But anyway, that's that's what we're offering.
Yeah, so I think it's important to ask the questions about their past experience working remotely. So, have you had experience working remotely or hybrid? Tell us how you finish projects remotely. Have you had important meetings remotely? Tell me how you prepare for important meetings in your home when you might be talking with this important person, right? Tell me
Yep.
about a time when had to do a video call. Like, you could talk about those
Yeah.
things. Another thing that I think is really important is directly paying for internet service. If people are working remotely, directly paying for internet service for folks. If somebody's a contractor, I don't know if you can. I never
Yeah.
remember. So you have to sort of figure that out. But for employees, you can directly pay for internet service, and that's better than giving them a stipend, because then you know the speed of the internet. So something to think
You
about.
know the speed of the internet.
Well,
What-
yeah, like if you're on a Zoom call with an important person, you want to make sure
Oh.
that the internet speed is.
Right. Yes.
So I want to talk a little bit about,
Of course, you would pay for the Zoom account and, you know, all of that. Would you also need to pay for a computer?
yeah,
Okay.
so in our organization, I operate under the assumption that when we buy a computer, and we're a nonprofit, when we purchase a computer for a staff person, we will never see the computer again. Like, that's, just, I think that that's something that you have to assume. And honestly, if you're having a staff person work for you for 2 years, that computer is not going to be great in 2 years anyway, like 2 or 3 years, like it's
Right.
probably going to be on its last leg. You wouldn't probably do that for a contractor. Like,
Right.
because they come with their own supplies.
Yeah.
Any other questions? This is hopefully you're getting the questions answered that you have. So we've hired the staff person that we need. And then we need to be thinking about how we do orientation, training, and onboarding. And I like to differentiate between all of these. So I like to think of orientation as this is how you turn your laptop on, right? Or this is how you need to submit your payroll information. It is you introducing new staff to the culture, policies, and the basic information. And it might only be 2 weeks, okay? And then there's training where, to Christina's point, you're really understanding and training those soft skills. Like, do they have the capacity to do the soft skills that we need them to do, right? So it's a longer process to focus on the technical skills and the job specific knowledge, and you're training for effective employment. Like, you're making sure that they can do the position. And then onboarding is long-term, so it might be 6 months to 9 months in. It might take 6 months to onboard for the role. And it incorporates being really future focused. So it's goal setting and check-ins and feedback and evaluation and ongoing support and resources. So they're all a little different in terms of time and length. This is the little chart that we created. And so an orientation might just be 2 weeks, and training might be 2 weeks to 2 months, or 3 months or 4 months, and onboarding might be 6 months. And, this is when we're thinking about mentorship and focus on retention and goal planning, because hiring costs a lot of money. It is not a cheap endeavor. It's your time. And so you want to make sure that when you hire, you're keeping the staff person that you've hired for. Okay. So in orientation, this might be what you include. So you might include maybe a packet, right? With the mission, the vision, the history, an org chart, important constituents, right? So people that they're going to meet, the program information, a welcome letter with a start date, right? New hire forms to complete, the website to review, maybe some online systems to learn. And so this you might send in an email, give it the first meeting that you have with the staff person. Maybe you take them out for lunch or breakfast or coffee, right? If everybody's working remotely and they get this the first week. And it's important because it's disorienting to start a new job. And just because something was shared in the job description or during the interview process doesn't mean anybody's going to remember anything. Like, you have to make sure that you share the information with the person you're hiring related to their job in the first 2 weeks. And then we've got training, right? So there's hard skills and soft skills, right? So we had the conversation before. The soft skills are more about your culture and having those conversations with partners and making sure that people are a fit for values. And the hard skills are, does somebody know Salesforce or Microsoft? So one thing to think about is, what are you hiring for when it comes to soft skills, right? So if somebody's gonna be representing your organization in coalition meetings, do they know how to speak on behalf of your organization? Right? And you want to get a sense of what that would look like, or when is flexibility needed? And so these are the things that are harder to train on, but you might want to know during the hiring process and think about scenarios where soft skills would come about. And then we also think of hard skills, right? And you might want to create a list of your hard skills. And so what are these hard skills? And one thing that I like to do is create a rubric during this process of how trained is somebody in their role. And because sometimes training takes time, right? And so you might create an internal training rubric and go through your hard skills, soft skills that, oh, I'll go back to it. This is just a sample. Like, I wouldn't take this because the reality is the position, like, this is a template, but you know, Maggie, if it's an executive director, it's probably going to be different hard skills than this. Like, it's an example, but you want to think
Yeah,
about,
even just having examples helps,
okay, cool.
because we don't know what we don't know.
That's true. Known unknowns. It might be, the hard skills might be, you know, I think it's a soft skill though, like major gift fundraising, right? Give me an example. But that's probably a soft skill, right? Talking with donors, because that's a big part of being an executive director. You're also going to get a copy of these slides. We're going to link where these slides live in the chat. So I like to create a rubric. Doesn't know, been trained, proficient. And that gives you a sense, and you want to do this rubric during the first probably 2 months and get a sense of, you might not do this for an executive director, but you'd probably do this for a program director, program manager, program coordinator. This might not be something that you do for an executive director position, but it would probably be for other positions. So something to think about. And then onboarding. So what actually happens during onboarding? You would onboard. So Maggie, you're hiring an executive director, 100% you would do this. So you would think about, right, the internal or external mentorship that they need and focus on retention. What do they need and you need? Because it's sort of this dance, right? Because you want to make sure that we hired the right person. We know we hired the right person and we want to keep them. But it's almost a conversation. What do we need to do to make sure that you stay on past the 2 years? Like, this is a good fit. And you want to have that conversation probably 8 months into the position if they're a good fit. And then goal planning. What do they need to achieve? How can they learn the role from you potentially? You know, and as executive director is really different than a board member, and that's a separate conversation. I'm guessing you're a board member, Maggie, or the founder.
Yes.
Okay, that's that's very different. Like what an executive director does versus what a founder does, or a board member.
Yes, I'm hoping that our part-time executive director saves my life.
Right, and so then it becomes, how will you release? And like, what does that conversation look like internally, right? Is how will you be prepared? I don't know why I just gave a thumbs up. Anyways, how will you start to prepare for that? What will that self-preparation look like to release some of the work? And that's probably something that you want to think about.
You
Yeah.
believe me.
What?
A lot.
What did you say?
I said, believe me, I think about it a lot.
Yeah. So things to be thinking about, right? What needs to occur in an orientation, training, or onboarding? And what are the hard skills an employee has to be trained on to be successful in their job? And so these are more reflection questions than anything else. All right. And these might be questions that you bring back to your organization. So things to be thinking about is, how do you differentiate between orientation, onboarding, and training? Do you? I mean, if this is your first hire, you haven't. And so then you have to create the process. And I guess in Maggie's case, one thing that I want folks to avoid is that phrase of hit the ground running. Like, don't think that's gonna happen, because we want to set our staff up for success. And so things to, oh wait, did I go too fast through a slide? This? You're gonna get
Thank
this.
you. Yeah, I know, but it's helpful to read it.
Yeah, I'll read it. Yeah. So, like, since Maggie, since you do have this new hire happening, right, is how much time are you giving to the orientation, training, and onboarding process, knowing that each one is really different?
Yep.
I don't have an answer for you, but I do know that an executive director is probably not acclimated into the position for about 9 months. I can tell you that they know, right? People know if the job is a fit for them, usually in the first month. And you have a sense if it's the right fit, probably in the first month or two, but they're not acclimated to the position for about 6 to 8 months, because there's just so much to being an executive director. And all of those things take time, a lot of time. And so, and often there is this tension because the hire should have happened 6 months ago, but it doesn't mean that they're going to do what needed to happen 6 months ago and currently. So that's something to think about too. We want to
Yeah.
set new hires up for success.
Of course. We also have short grant periods.
Yeah. So I like to do, and you could do this as a 30-day, 60-day, right? Like a new hire. And you can share this as we've never hired for a role and we'd like to get your thoughts on this. It could be a one-on-one conversation. Larger organizations send this out as a survey, but you know, it's a weird thing to send out to a survey when you only have 2 people on staff. So then it becomes a conversation. And then, so you sort of want to be thinking about what this looks like and how you have this conversation after you hire somebody is an opportunity to improve the process. Right? And sometimes it's hard for people to be directly honest. So then it's sort of if you only have one staff person, it's hard to do this as a one-on-one conversation. So, but if you have, right, a large organization, it's easy to do this because it's more anonymous. So then it might be like, what resources would have been helpful during the hiring process? Like you might not do this as a survey, but it might become a conversation. Like, we want to plan for the future and we want to make sure you're set up to hire other staff. What resources might have been helpful? You know, was our job descriptions clear? Right? And, you know, is it clear what you still need to learn for your role? The executive director, it better be obvious how the role contributes to the organization, but for a position that's a different job classification, maybe program coordinator or program manager, that might be different. So then I want to talk about transitions because organizations have transitions all the time. And it's important to think about how we prepare for them, whether they're planned or not, right? And sometimes they're not planned. So we want to have standard operating procedures. And what does that mean? That means it is not in here, it is on paper. Right? And standard operating procedures for your programs, for your services, they provide context, framing, and the how-to. So Maggie, if you were the founder, is everything on paper? Like, do other people know how to run your programs? So what does that process look like for getting that down on paper? What have you started to do? Can I ask?
Well, are you asking as an organization what we've started to do in this area
Yeah.
to
Or,
record
yeah,
how we
like,
do things?
how are you sort of preserving the institutional knowledge of your programs for your, like, to prepare for these transitions?
Well, I would say if having a standard operating procedure was 100%, we're about 2% there.
Okay, so like, right, if I had to come in tomorrow to run your programs, would I know, let's pretend that in the fall you do recruitment. Would I know what recruitment looks like for your programs? Or would I know what your big events are or your big programs are and how to run them and who your
Well, we're
community?
we're only a year old,
Okay,
so
you're
you
writing this down.
could, in fact, take a look at, our contact lists for our planners convenings, and you could see that we've been having one every month, and you could look at our volunteer lists and our contact lists and donor lists, and you could look at when we've done fundraising campaigns and what those looked like. So we have, all of the documentation that goes with the events, like the waiver forms and all of that kind of stuff. But there's no kind of like, how do you do the work that primarily 3 board members have been doing?
So you said a planners event, what was that, or a planners convening?
Yeah, so we're a watershed group.
Mhm.
So, in addition to learning gatherings, we also have planning gatherings because we're both a learning and a planning community. We're
Mhm.
working toward a comprehensive watershed and resilience plan. So we invite the planners of the 4 towns and the 2 tribal nations to the table, supported by research organizations and big NGOs to set vision and goals. And so, and there's a list and there's a system, and we know that we meet in person quarterly and virtually once a month and so on. So we have set goals. So, but that's it. I mean, there's no kind of, if I'm knocking on wood, if something were to happen to me tomorrow, it would be a huge setback for the organization.
So, yeah,
And I'm aware of that all the time. And so some of our other board members, like our treasurer, for example, she is trying to put together something like this by asking us all to keep track of how many hours we spend doing what, right? That's one of her first steps in this. And, we applied for funding to make something like this and a strategic plan that would go with it. And we didn't get that funding. So we are doing our best to be like a sponge and just, learn from these kinds of sessions and conversations with friends and allies. We
Yeah.
are an alliance, so we have lots of organizational allies, lots of organizational expertise. So we're asking them to tell us how they do it, and we're learning.
Yeah, so one thing to think about is like, what is most, you're not gonna do everything right away. So what's most essential? Maybe it's the planning convening, I don't know if I'm saying the correct phrase, but the
Okay,
plan,
doesn't matter.
the thing that you do, maybe the planning event. And at least you have that documented of like the flow of that.
Yep.
So that when you hire your executive director, you're not like, there's that, you're preserving that institutional knowledge. And so that they can really take it over and manage the process. So the things that we want to think about is like, what is the most important?
I think what's likely to
categories?
happen to our new part-time ED, who I'm not even 100% sure ED is the right title. Because a lot of their work is going to be communicating, helping to keep our organization organized. So organizing volunteers, we have 250 people in our organization.
Are you
And they
still
all
gonna
want to be
be-
involved in one way or another.
Are you still gonna be very active and involved in the organization?
Can be my first, I think one of the first things that I'm going to be doing with this person is helping them to do these, write up these SOPs by virtue of training. Like this is what we do, this is how we do it. Can you write that up? And you know, because I don't have, look, I can't stop everything right now as
Right?
we're trying to get these grants going to
Yeah.
actually write down everything we're doing.
It
And
might be interesting to with a title of executive director, it sometimes creates this tension. And because if you're still gonna be intimately involved in the day-to-day, like technically an executive director, right? Like, so technically the board does governance and the executive director does the day-to-day. It might be interesting to like have the conversation with your organization about calling it an associate director or like, or you just want to be clear that the board is intimately involved in the day-to-day operations.
or an administrative director, or I don't know. I mean, it's executive functions is what this, like when we think of what our brain does that we call executive functions, that's what we need help doing.
Right, or it could just be, director of, and then is it fundraising, is it programs, or is it really an executive director role? I'm
It's
asking, I'm
communications,
not
it's
saying.
fundraising, it's programs.
Yeah. Yeah,
And it's being able to, represent the organization, right? Like, we don't need that person to solely represent the organization because we have 9 people on our board, but we also have working groups that need to be organized and stood up. And, there's a lot of work to do that if I'm going to be, and our board is going to be focused on the relationship building, keeping the organization strong, working on that watershed resilience action plan. There's enough moving parts in that I can't also be writing the newsletter and, managing the donors and, there just isn't enough time. There aren't enough hours in the day.
yeah.
So what we call that person is one of my big questions.
So I feel like it is an executive director. And how do you frame, when are you hiring for the person?
ASAP.
And how do you frame the intimate and like, how do you explain and frame the relationship between the board and the executive director?
They will be working closely with us
Mm-hmm.
to bring about our mission.
Ooh, Diana asked a good question. What will be your title once the new person comes on board? What's your title now?
Director.
Oh,
We're all directors.
because you're
So
Board member,
So you could say I'm board chair.
okay,
As far as the federal government is concerned, I'm president of this 501c3, but no one has ever referred to me that way. I tend to refer, because we're a really collaboratively run organization, we're all kind of co-directors, so I tend to refer to myself as a first chair director,
mhm,
like a first chair violinist. Any violinists. And so my title will not be executive director, and never has been. It's just that I've been doing all of these tasks because I'm the most retired member of the board. And, I'm also a founding director. So I suppose our vision, which has been really collaboratively developed, has roots among the founders. So
yeah,
there's that. But I would be relying on this person to handle the communications, the organizational end of the networking, the basic, what do I want to say, program development, and the fundraising, the management of fundraising and events. So
okay, and
that's, to me, that's all, these are all executive functions that are not
Yeah.
necessarily specifically grants management, which is also somebody we're hiring for. It might be that the person has those hard skills and, wants to add to their hours. But yeah, the executive director one is the one where I have the most questions.
yeah, and, this is, and I'm asking again about the pay because it was really unclear to me. The pay was unclear to me, and I'm
'Cause
asking,
it's two jobs,
okay, so the
right?
executive director role is,
That's one.
okay,
That's the one that's 50,000 a year for 2 years. For part-time, a little over half-time.
got it, okay. Okay, so like, you'll get a great candidate because 50,000, and it's really, so my next question is it really part-time? Is that what you're expecting? Like, if the person you hire really only works part-time and really only part-time, are you setting them up for a success? Like, are you expecting them to work more than part-time? Like, that is,
So, okay, Diana, thank
Want
you.
to share out loud, Diana? Or I don't know if you can unmute.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Diana.
So that's why I mentioned the associate director role.
I'm here.
Share. So yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I think, Maggie, one of the things you might do, because you're bringing someone into a role that, and I completely understand that you have 2% of your operating plan completed. I think I have less than that, right? Because we're trying to do everything, right? Founders,
Yep.
directors, everything. But I think one of the problems that you want to prevent from happening is that you hire someone and they don't work out, right?
Yep.
And now they're executive director. And I think there's a certain amount of, there is a certain amount of, how do I say this? Assumptions people make when they hear the word executive director. They think they're in charge, right?
Yeah.
And they might come up in conflict with you, who is not the executive director, but has been acting as the executive director. And I think you want to understand, at least for the immediate future, that they do have a subordinate role to you because
Yeah.
to train them. And
Yeah.
so making them associate director until they are fully trained, until you and the board feel that they're comfortable in the job and they're doing the job you want, and then maybe give them the role of executive director after you feel they have developed all the competences.
Great. That was so helpful. Thank you. I feel like you just opened the door.
You're quite welcome. Believe you me, we're all in this together. and learn-
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing that you might do is like taking, Diana's ideas a step further and going back to what we talked about with probationary is but like internally you think about this, you don't tell the candidate this, but you all decide like once they get past the probationary period, or once we get to XYZ state in our organization, that's when we can talk about hiring an executive director. Because there is this inherent tension between the board and the executive director, and you don't want to deal with that with your first hire. I was a first hire at an organization years ago, and they titled me director, and that was great. Because I didn't have to deal with thinking about everything. And you're intimately involved in the organization.
I mean, should we call someone like that who doesn't want to be an associate? Because that also comes with certain assumptions. But could we call them something like a program director or communications and program director of programs and communication?
I think you just call, what's wrong? Well, I think you just call them director.
Okay. Of course,
Have the
we're all called
conversation with your
directors.
What?
So we're all called directors.
Yeah, but you're called director. You're not paid staff. You're not an
Right.
employee. If you were an employee and a board member, your title for the board would be your board position, and your title for the role would be whatever it is, but
Okay.
you're a director because you're a director of the board, and this person is a director as an employee. I don't know if there's a connotation with the word associate and it has a bad connotation, but to Diana's point, like an associate director is a catch-all term. If you say program director, that does not mean fundraising, that means program.
See, right. Okay.
If you
Yeah.
say
It's
communication,
limiting.
that means comms.
Yep.
Associate means,
They can do a little of a lot of things.
yeah, it's vague.
Okay.
Diana, anything else? that you
Vague in a
want-
good way.
Yeah, vague in a good way. Anything else that you want to share, Diana?
Nothing else right now. I don't know the right term, but I think if you tell the person that they're associate director during the training and the whatever onboarding, and then they become the director once they can actually take over the job without, they take over the job once they've gained the competency.
Independently. Yeah.
Exactly.
And it might look like having an internal conversation with your board members and saying, like, what do we think is realistic? Like, what's an ideal timeline for us to have an executive director who's fully functioning on their own without us? A year and a half? 2 years? Like, it'd be interesting to hear what you all say.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Don't say 3 months.
2 weeks.
No, that's like,
No, I know.
You have to be realistic for yourself and others.
Yeah. Yep.
So leadership transitions, I do think this is, something that we need. I did go through those other things. You're going to get the slides, and I would think that we like to think of, an operating procedures as almost like a template, and you'll get access to those. But we want to be prepared for transitions. So, a transition memo, maybe a virtual bookshelf of resources and guidelines with all of these things. And it lives in, your G Suite or Ignite or whatever your shared online resources are. And then I like to also have this, and I call it like if you move to the moon document. No one's gonna be contacting you if you move to the moon, right? So where is all of this information? Where does it live? Your grant information, your fundraising, your financials, your contact information, your insurance policies. If you have a building, your program information, your strategic plans. Those are the types of things that we want to be thinking about. And then, whew, we often want to think about, what's the average employment at your organization? And this varies, obviously. So for Maggie, they're doing their first hire. For other folks who have 10 to 11 staff, the average, length of employment might be a year or 2 years or 3 years. And it's different for entry level versus senior staff. And we want to be thinking about, some of these things sooner rather than later. These are some books and resources that I like. Connected to what we're talking about. I always say Libby is your friend because you can get some of those books from the library. Anyways, we are coming literally to a close. We're gonna send you all of these slides so you have access to them. Do you want to
Thank you
close
so
out?
much for, thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Leah, for this great training. I felt like all your questions were valid and good. And so like with all our trainings, we will post the slides, the recording up on our site. And then just stay tuned. If you haven't already registered for the annual learning exchange, you can do that. And then also we have the registration links for the training in July, for project management. So I'll share that out with you as well.
Thank you all
Thank you
so
so
much.
much
This
for
is such a
everyone.
fun conversation. And if you're ever, you have access to my email. So if you're doing this and you're thinking like, oh my gosh, this is not what I thought it would be. Like anybody who does a training with us, we're always willing to have a conversation after,
And
like that comes with it. So
Leah, just to clarify, you have all those great templates, and if they click on those little icons, it'll take them to it. Perfect.
yeah.
Okay, I'll just indicate that.
So wait, like they get the slides and then there's a link here. I'm gonna link it again. Wait, I don't know. Our tech support's gonna link to the resources right now. So you have
Okay,
access
perfect.
to them. So that you have access to the resources. And then we'll also send them to you.
Oh, excellent. Okay, and I can share it out with everyone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your day. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.